Have you ever wished you could eavesdrop on a conversation with a millionaire? My name is Michelle Thompson. I'm a retired project controls engineer and business professor, and that's exactly what I'm going to do in this podcast. I get to ask the questions that everyone else wishes they could. I'm going to find out exactly how they were able to build their empires through automation and outsourcing. And I'm going to break it down in a way that helps you build your business to run on autopilot. Don't miss out on Automate to Dominate.
From author Donnie Boivin comes the book, How to Be a Success Champion, available on Amazon. After years of living other people's dreams, author Donnie Boivin decided to jump out on his own and start a business, thinking it would be easy. Instead, he had a rude awakening and quickly understood that he had spent 20 years being an employee and had no idea how to be a business owner. His business was tanking, and he was on the brink of losing everything when he decided to fight for business freedom. In this must-read and life-changing book, author Donnie Boivin shares with readers his story intermingled with lessons learned from his mistakes and his failures. In How to Be a Success Champion, you will find advice the author received from mentors and how he went from zero to a six-figure business. The author walks you through the steps of how to get out of your own way, how to play the game of business and win, find your strengths, how to network effectively, how to build a personal brand, how to create champions for your business, how to get great at sales, how to take complete ownership of you and your business. How to Be a Success Champion from author Donnie Boivin, available on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback editions. Order your copy right now. It makes a great book for corporate events too. How to Be a Success Champion from author Donnie Boivin, available on Amazon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Automate to Dominate. Today we have Mike Czesniak from the Results Engine, and I am so excited to have him on here because he is like the productivity king. He's working on Hack Your Fears, Live Your Dreams. He's going to tell us all about that. But before I get into it, Mike, thanks for being on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Michelle, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I know that we're in some similar communities. I've seen your stuff pop around, so it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I don't know, my story is like, I think like my experience is like a scatter plot, right? Like if you look at my LinkedIn profile, it doesn't really, you're like, wait, senior software engineer to running a consulting company that doesn't have to do with software? Like how, what? And so it's always cool to try and paint that picture, but I'll try and do it as concise as possible. Long story short, my life revolved around where I could play soccer in college. And basically that process looked like, okay, my club team, my travel soccer team, we would go to college showcases. They would have a list of all the coaches that were in attendance and would be in attendance. I would print that list out, bring it to my guidance counselor, schedule some time with him, and we would go through and, highlight all the schools that made sense, were good academic fits. Because I very much grew up in a family where it was like, cool, definitely play soccer in college. That's amazing. But you're not going D1 for the sake of going D1 and getting a shitty education. Like that's just not happening. So I would do that. And during one of these conversations, he said, hey, Mike, like he was looking at my transcript. He said, hey, Mike, you're good at math and sciences. Why don't you look at engineering? I'm like, cool. Well, do they make a lot of money? Right? Because back then, all I cared about was, making a bunch of money, retiring young, and opening a pit bull rescue foundation. That was like all I cared about. Cool. And so I ended up getting recruited by a good engineering school 4 years later. None of the classes, like the make or break classes in that curriculum, scared me away. And I ended up with a computer engineering degree. Then I went down to Wall Street and started my corporate career. From there, Hurricane Sandy got me out of that contract. Shout out to Mother Nature. And I ended up finding my own job at a company where I spent 5 years. And, it very linear trajectory. Every year was a big pay raise, big promotion. Like I had all the things that I thought I wanted, right? Senior title, 6-figure salary, luxury apartment, all by like age of 25. And as we so often hear nowadays, like behind closed doors, it's not the case. Like things aren't all sunshine and rainbows like they appeared to be. And for me, that was showing up with tons of anxiety and debilitating panic attacks. Michelle, I'll never forget, January 1st, 2014 was the first day that I ever experienced a full-blown panic attack. And for anyone that hasn't experienced this before, first of all, I hope you never do, but it feels like there's 1,000 pounds on your chest. Right. I was watching Captain Phillips. It was New Year's Day. My roommate was out of town. He always goes up to on like a ski trip for New Year's. And I was sitting by myself on my couch on the 14th floor of this apartment building watching Captain Phillips. And I was so fired up to see this movie. And unfortunately, it's ruined for me because of what I experienced. I kind of feel bad for him because I've been wanting to watch the movie for like a year. But all of a sudden I fall into this attack. And in that moment, I picked up the phone and I called my mom, because for me, like, I don't know, like I was by myself in this apartment. Like you kind of crave connection in that moment. And I'll never forget, I had to press mute on the phone because I was head deep in a toilet in the middle of this attack because it got so bad. And I didn't want to scare her more than I probably already had through my tonality on that call. And this started about a year and a half journey of, going to the doctors, getting my chest x-ray, doing the breathing tests, all these things, because I thought it was physiological. Like I thought there was an issue with my lungs. I didn't know what anxiety was. Like I didn't know what I was experiencing. I never talked to anyone who had. Back then it wasn't cool to talk about mental health, right? Social media was more of a highlight reel than it is now. And I didn't understand that. So what I realized, because eventually you have to reverse engineer what's going on. And I realized, okay, well, let me figure out what's actually happening. Like, when am I experiencing these attacks? And for me, 1,000% of the time, every single one of them happened in a moment where I felt guilty for not working. Right. And what I realized is I had zero clue what it meant to actually be productive. I didn't know what it meant. I thought it was like, if I wasn't working 47 hours a day, I wasn't being productive enough. Right. And I always say that kind of cracked the door open. I still resisted the coaching and consulting industry for about 3 years after this point, but it kind of cracked the door open. I started to geek out about productivity. And now that's only a fraction of what we do with our clients at the Results Engine. But for me, it's always going to be my baby. It's the pillar that I love the most because it changed the game for me. And about 3 years later, eventually I entered the coaching consulting space. But I think a big piece of it for me is also, this was the third company I started while I was in corporate. I was always trying to create, and just do something entrepreneurially. I always believed that like what we thought was guaranteed salary, which hopefully at this point people have realized it's not so guaranteed with what's going on in the world. More stable, of course. And I'm not here to knock, running a 9-to-5. Like, it served an amazing role. So I funded my journey. But I always knew I wanted something more. And so I was always trying to create. I ran this company for 1.5 years as a side hustle. And then eventually, jumped off the cliff, figured out how to build the parachute on the way down, and haven't looked back since. So I think that is probably as much as I can condense this story, but hopefully that gives some people some context.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned, productivity is one of the things that you guys focus on at the Results Engine. What else do you guys focus on with your clients?
In the high performance world, and by the way, let me start by defining what high performance is, because frankly, it was a freaking branding nightmare for me, because like a huge piece of my life is the fitness world. Most of my friends and my colleagues are in the fitness community, or like fitness professionals. I'm a competitive power lifter. Fitness has been a part of my life forever. So when people saw high performance and they saw me posting content around like my training regimen for my first competition, when I first started in this space, they thought I was a fitness coach. I'm not. When we say high performance, basically how we define it is succeeding beyond standard norms consistently over the long term while maintaining positive well-being and positive relationships, right? Because let's be real. Everyone listening or watching this, if you're watching the Facebook Live, like, we all know that person that maybe in our eyes is at the peak of financial success, but maybe they achieved it at the expense of their health or at the expense of their relationships. Maybe the health's deteriorating, or maybe personal relationships are falling apart. High performance is creating this well-oiled machine that crushes it on its way to all these goals, whatever it is that we want to crush and whatever it is that we want to achieve success in, and however we define success, but not doing it at the expense. Okay. So in that world, there are 5 main pillars we focus on: clarity, energy, courage, productivity, and influence. So productivity is about 20%, I guess, if you argue it that way. And then, of course, in the certified high performance coaching curriculum, which is one of the product offerings that we have, we'll dive into, categories of these pillars like persuasive skill, purpose, presence, all of these things. But those are the 5 main pillars.
So let's dive into the productivity just a little bit. Okay. So I know you have a giveaway, the 7-day productivity boost. Tell us what that is and where somebody can find that.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically over the last, I guess, 3 or 4 years really of just geeking out about this, really geeking out about productivity for the last 5 or 6 years, but building the business for the last 3 or 4. This boost is really the culmination of studying a lot of the top performers, figuring out what's worked best for me, what's worked best for my clients, and putting it all in one resource. I used to run it as a challenge, right? Which is, again, super common in the fitness industry, right? Like 21-day challenge. I did that with this, and it was super fun. The results were insane, but I'm like, okay, I can't, like, this isn't scalable, right? Because I want to help a lot of people. So we put it into this PDF so that a lot of people could access it. And if anyone wants to grab a copy, you could just head to mikesesniak.com/free, and you'll be able to, I think you just pop in an email, we'll deliver it to you via email. But I think productivity is just such a misunderstood topic, which is why I'm so passionate about it, because misunderstanding it played a massive role for me.
Right.
And, I think it's really common to fall into the trap that I thought of, which is thought it was like being busy, getting things done, checking things off of a to-do list. I didn't realize that doing things doesn't matter if the things you're doing don't matter, right? Like there's no sense optimizing something that shouldn't be done in the first place, right? And one of the biggest lies that we tell ourselves is we don't have time. I think this quarantine situation, I don't know when this is going to go live, but right now we're in the middle of this quarantine. Some states are about to lift it, but a lot of us have more time than ever before. So a lot of people are getting exposed because it wasn't that we didn't have time. It's that we didn't have the discipline, right? And that's okay.
It's so true. And I saw a post on Facebook that was hilarious that said, I always told myself when I had more time, I would get to all that spring cleaning that I've been waiting. And I realized time wasn't the problem. Right?
Exactly. When we say it's not like we don't have time, that's not what we mean. Like it's the biggest lie we've ever told. What we really mean is it's not worth our time, and that's okay. Yep. But that little change in verbiage is very, very powerful, right? Because then it's not like victim, woe is me, like I have no control of these things. It's like, no, these things are more important, and that's okay. But we need to understand that. So, in this boost, it's 7 days. We go through it sequentially. Everything from a lot of those pillars we mentioned, clarity, energy, and productivity are very much in there. And it's what I've found a sequential way to really boost productivity very, very fast. And in the what I would call the right way. Right? Getting super clear on what's worthy of our time. Things like a daily audit. It's a practice in there that to this day, like everybody's hitting me up and saying, dude, that's the piece of content that changed the game. So I highly suggest getting it. It's something that changed the game for me, and hopefully it's half as valuable for everybody listening as it has been for myself and my clients.
That's I'm sitting here listening to this and I didn't realize how very similar you and I are, which is hilarious because I went to college on a basketball scholarship, but played soccer too. Actually loved soccer more than basketball, but was better at basketball. So I got the scholarship for basketball. And then same thing, went into the corporate world and, scaling the ladder. And I didn't have an off button, right? Like on the weekend, I didn't know what to do with myself, right? Because I was like, I'm not contributing anything. What's wrong, right? And so I'd go find stuff to just stay busy, right? Because it was like this, I don't know, like it was how I found my self-worth, right? Yeah. And, fast forward a couple of years, I didn't have a panic attack. I had a stroke. And so, ended up, everything literally got stripped, like you will no longer remember how to add 2 plus 2. And so, same exact deal where I had to get like super specific and almost reinvent myself, where being busy is not where we find our identity, right? It's all about, like you said, it's all about, finding that clarity of what do we want to spend our time on. And it's okay to not be busy 24/7. Like, we want to have really awesome goals, and we want to have kick-ass goals and kick them out of the water, right? But it's okay to not have to spend, what did you say, 47 hours a day doing it, right? Yeah. So I'm just sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, like, wow, we have almost the same story, which is hilarious. I had no idea. That's super cool.
Yeah, that was like the big thing for me, because I would sell 40 to 60 hours of my week to the corporation I was working for. And everything outside of that, I was trying to build my businesses. It was like that 5 to 7 a.m., 7 to 11 p.m.
Yep.
And on weekends, like all of it, right?
Yep.
Feel like I'm working all the time, but really not working as efficiently as I probably should, because I didn't understand what it meant or how to do it. And you pair that with a very unhealthy mind. Like, I'm someone that has extremely high goals and very high expectations for myself, which it sounds like you can relate to.
I don't think I've given myself a little grace. I'm not as
I do now. I do now.
I used to never give myself any grace, but yeah.
Exactly. And that grace is something that I've really had to figure out how to build. But, you pair
which
those
comes
two things
with the clarity that you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Clarity in the high performance world, like, clarity is what we call the cornerstone habit, right? What we mean by that is, when you have clarity, everything rises. But when you don't, everything kind of falls back a bit, right? It's kind of like that cliche, a rising tide lifts all ships, which is true. But when the tide goes out, what happens to the ships?
Right.
They go with it. So it's such a powerful piece, and having that clarity, it changes the game in all aspects. But I didn't have the off button. I didn't know what productivity meant. I had these crazy high goals and high expectations. And then you pair that with a very unhealthy mindset around social media. I didn't realize it was a highlight reel, right? Like, I thought I was looking at the blueprint to get where I wanted to go.
Yep.
I didn't realize that these people that seemingly had what I wanted weren't sharing the L's, right? Like, they weren't sharing the dips and the volatility of the journey. So
yep.
It was a tough spot. And I think that's probably why a massive piece of my mission is just being transparent about the journey, because I know what it's like to not see that part.
Yep.
And, but yeah, it's cool. Sounds like we have very, very similar stories.
Yeah. In fact, when I created this podcast, I specifically said, I'm going to be in a sweatshirt and a hat. And when I do client meetings, you're going to see me in a t-shirt, because before, like, you would have never caught me dead on anything other than my, like, best blue power suit, right? And, everything's pristine, perfect, like the makeup's perfect, the, hair's perfect, right? Like, nobody's allowed to see the real me in my Adidas sweatpants, right? Which, like, my soccer sweatpants, right? And I was like, no. I refuse to do that anymore. And so I kind of, a lot like you kind of went down the productivity, and I went the same route, only I tried to figure out, how do I be productive without me having to do it? And so I tried to figure out automations and systems, right? And so, and that was why I wanted to talk to you, because you are, like, really good at being able to take massive goals and just launch them, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about that, about the, what systems do you do to make sure that you're so successful? And what are the things that you've put in place that have really helped you narrow in on that productivity and just crush those goals?
Yeah. So for myself and a lot of the work we do with our clients, I do a lot of, like, what I would call blitz work, right? Where we essentially collapse windows that we think it will take to accomplish a goal, right? Kind of based on this principle.
Talking about time blocking.
Sort of. When I say blitz, I'm talking like 30, 60, 90 days, right?
Oh,
so,
okay.
For example, anyone that's watching this, they see this banner behind me, Hack Your Fear, Live Your Dream. That's all of our Fear Hacking Academy, which is called literally Fear Hacking 30, 60, 90, because we break the 90 days into 3 30-day blitzes. So what we do in those blitzes, those are kind of like strategically built out for a couple different phases. But when you do that, we have this concept of non-negotiables, and this is really what everything's built on. Like life should be built on this, not just like a blitz for a sales blitz or building whatever it is to work towards that promotion, right? These programs have helped people turn their slowest month into their most profitable month in company history, or get promoted in 8 weeks. All these things are amazing, but then they're blown away when the transformation happens in the life stuff. Right? So the same principles apply everywhere. But non-negotiables for me, like this is one of my favorite things. It's very, very simply like, what are we going to do on a daily and a weekly basis that is absolutely non-negotiable? Like we cannot rationalize our way out of it. If we realize it's 9 p.m. and we haven't done it, cool. Well, the day's not done yet, right? We have to go and do it. And it's going to suck and it's going to be difficult. But guess what? The mental gains afterwards are going to be way better. Right.
So what are those things? What are those things for you? What are your non-negotiables every day? Yeah. I'm assuming powerlifting is one of them.
I got to change the intro to my story because I'm on a hiatus from powerlifting. Really quick.
Me too. Context. Can't you tell? You like that? Just kidding.
It was taking, honestly though, Michelle, it was taking like 12 to 15 hours a week in the gym. And it was like, I love it. I was a goalkeeper in soccer, so that was like my license to have a couple screws loose. And I've just figured out how to channel that intensity.
You've got a plate in your head too for getting kicked in the head so many times.
Not yet, thankfully. But like a lot of the joints on my fingers don't work. Like, oh yeah, I took a beating, but I figured out how to channel that intensity into all these different areas, and that speaks very well to powerlifting. Right? It's like that aggressive, competitive nature, but it was just such an expenditure for me. And I had to press pause on it a little bit because it was really getting in the way of how I wanted to scale the impact of the company. 12 to 15 hours a week in the gym is a huge time investment alone. And then my energy would take a dive off a cliff, and there's only so much we can do and so much coffee you can drink. And I didn't want to be relying on, external stimulants to get what I wanted to get done. But day-to-day basis, quarantine been a little bit interesting, but here's what I'm doing right now. I just got my greens supplement in the mail yesterday, which I'm super stoked about. On a typical day, it's a greens drink in the morning, some sort of meditation. I'm really exploring Wim Hof's breathing right now, which is really cool. I have my Whoop band right here, which helps me track all of everything.
What kind of a band is it?
It's called Whoop, WHOOP. Really, really cool company. It tracks everything from, your heart rate to heart rate variability, how many breaths per minute you're taking while you're sleeping, right? Wow. Which is actually, they've been doing some cool studies with relation to like COVID, right? Not necessarily COVID itself, but like if there's a spike in that number, you're really not seeing a big change day to day, right? Or night to night. If there's a big spike and all of a sudden you're taking an extra 3 breaths per minute, there might be something to look at. So doing a lot of really cool work, tracks your runs, tracks everything. But one thing that it tracks and that I'm really geeking out about right now is what they call your recovery, right? Which is they have this concept of like in the green. If you're above 70% cardiovascular recovery, it's green. So here, I'll show you because today I'm in the red. Let me show you really quickly so people can see. So this is my recovery yesterday. I didn't do my Wim Hof yesterday, so bad example for me, right? Bad time. But it's 32%. Meanwhile, if we go to yesterday, it was 95%. And what I've found is every single day that I do my Wim Hof breathing, they also coincide on days that I'm working out and a lot of these other things, but I worked out yesterday too, and it's 35%. So the biggest common denominator is the Wim Hof breathing. And every single day I do it.
People who have no clue people who have no clue what Wim Hof breathing is, tell us about that.
Yeah, it's honestly, I don't know a whole lot about it. Like,
is it like a meditation breathing technique?
Kind of, yeah. It's a way to get oxygen throughout your body. Wim Hof is like, his story itself is absolutely wild. I interviewed Dr. Tricia Smith on my podcast. She's super cool, like absolute wealth of knowledge. And she was one of the first women certified in the US through WIM's practices. But essentially it helps you tap back into your central nervous system and really like control everything in your body. Like, it's crazy. All that I know right now is every day that I do it, the next day I'm in the green and my cardiovascular recovery is through the roof. So that's a big thing for me right now. Every single day I have some sort of activity, exercise. I'm running 3 days a week right now. The big thing for me is not powerlifting, but I'm doing a half marathon later this year with a good buddy of mine. So I'm running 3 days a week and then weight training 3 days a week. So there's some sort of exercise. I'm trying to read every single day, minimum.
What are you reading right now?
Brain Maker. It's all around gut health and how your gut health actually impacts your brain, and kind of the correlations between like everything from like mental illness to like chronic pain and all these things, like how gut health basically dictates everything. Super, super cool.
Do you know Amir Pozniak?
No, I do not.
I need to connect you with him because he's like same type of idea as that book, and I can't remember the name of the book he told me to read. Psycho-cybernetics, maybe. Anyway, what's that? So he actually has a degree like in psycho-cybernetics and like all this stuff. Like, he's like amazing at it. So remind me and I will connect the two of you because that would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I guess to tie a bow on this answer, for me, like, by the way, there's no cut and dry answer. There's okay to be playful with it. But for me, it's like, cool, what are we going to do on a daily basis? And then when you need to pivot, test and see what you love to do. But in any given moment, there's some sort of meditation. There's some sort of personal development. There's a bunch of self-care. And there's usually inevitably some sort of business building activity at that moment. So right now for me, it's a lot of messaging and organic outreach for a specific part of the business that we want to grow. In other times, it was like a specific number of pieces of outreach or guest invites for the podcast when I was launching it, or review requests or whatever it is, right? But in these blitzes, there's always a combination of life stuff and business stuff, because that structure, like the confidence and the momentum and the mental gains, astronomically outweighs the financial ROI that we will inevitably get when we scale what we want to scale.
So for those who aren't aware, Mike has a top-rated Apple podcast called, ironically, The Results Engine. And if you haven't checked it out, I would strongly recommend you do so. You're on episode 40 now? Is that it? I think
51 came out this morning.
Oh, wow. Okay. Have you published all 51?
Yep.
Oh, whoops. Okay. I'm off. Sorry. I was looking at the blog post. So Mike had this incredible system, and I want him to use this as an example to show you guys the power of how Mike works. So Mike, tell us, when you first launched, right? And we were all in Zach's group. You went through a little bit before I did. Tell us your blueprint on how you were able to make your podcast so successful.
Yeah, so I literally took this same practice. I built out blitzes for myself, and the work parts, like I mentioned before, they were specifically around podcast growth. So at the time I hadn't even launched, but it was like, cool, well, I'm going to reach out to X number of people per week. That was like the business metric. And there were a couple other things that we were doing as well, but one was specific for the podcast growth. And all that was doing was I want to get as many people on this show. So by leveraging practices like this, and having these weekly non-negotiable targets before I even, and again, like shout out to Zach, because he provided the blueprint. I've known Zach for about 5 years, and it's been amazing to see what he's built. But I decided
we're talking about Zachary Babcock, just so, sorry, keep going.
No, yeah, Zach's the homie. And, he had the blueprint. So I just took what he told me to do and I plugged it into my system. And that helped me skyrocket production around what actually mattered. And I knew it mattered because I had a battle-tested system or battle-tested blueprint, right? I had like the map. And before we even launched the show, we had like 40 plus episodes already on the calendar. And I think you could argue at least like 20 of those people were the quote unquote celebrity entrepreneurial type people with the massive brands that we're all frankly learning from on the internet through their social media content or whatever it is. So it was amazing. But at the end of the day, it just came down to, cool, what are the key action items, right? Which is really productivity. Like, we don't need to be doing a million things. We need to be doing a couple things a million times, right? So what are those key actions? I got that from Zach. Zach told me what the actions were, and I plugged them into a system that allowed me to crank up those numbers because, frankly, what we believe we're truly capable of. Have you read David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me?
No.
Okay, awesome book. The audiobook is really, really cool because it's a combination of like audiobook and podcast. Someone else narrates the book, but then what happens is afterwards they'll cut the reading and then they'll bring David in and they'll kind of talk about whatever just happened in the book, and you can kind of, because David's story is like crazy and he didn't want to relive it, frankly, to read it. I think that's a big piece of why he didn't narrate it, but it's a really cool combination. David Goggins has this concept where, similar to a car has a governor, right? Where you can't go past it. That's a maximum speed that the car can go. His concept is we have the same thing in our brain. And what we believe is our true capacity is really only 40 to 60% of what we're truly capable of.
Wow.
Now, I believe that capacity is a fleeting concept, right? And I believe what David said. And the further that we can chase that capacity away, all of a sudden, the more we realize that we're really capable of, this delta, this gap becomes massive. And we start to uncover more and more of those things. And that's what we do through these blitzes where we start to overload those numbers. But Zach gave me the ideas of what needed to be happening. I plugged it into the system and it allowed us to jack up those results and really start to lengthen that gap of what we were actually capable of. And it just launched the show really, really well.
Yeah.
And then I just did what Zach told me.
Yeah. And so for everybody who's listening and is like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm an action taker. I'm not a lazy bum. I just need the system that Mike has. Where do they get that system? How do you teach that system to them?
Yeah, at the end of the day, like, just slide in the DMs, right? I answer all my DMs on social media and just have a conversation. If there's something that we're talking about right now that you have a question about, slide in. Whether you want to get supported through a program or just a one-off question, like, by all means. I think right now more than ever, we need to make sure that we're getting the resources that we need and getting the questions answered. So please don't think that there's a barrier to entry. And if you slide in the DMs, I'm 100% going to sell you something. Let's get the questions answered. But that's the best way. I answer all of my DMs, and that, frankly, that's where all the conversations start. If we decide that it makes sense to explore one of the programs, whether it's Fear Hacking Academy or, some of the certified high performance coaching work, it always starts in the DMs. And that's the best place to reach me for sure.
And just so you guys know, I can attest to the fact of how giving Mike is, because he literally took the blueprint that he used for podcast and he tied it up in a nice little bow and gave it to all of us that were in the program and said, here, go do this. And so we took Zach's ideas and then we saw how Mike built a system around it. And I was actually able to do, the exact same thing. So not quite as good as you. I got ranked 52. So I didn't quite get past that 50, but we'll get there. But yeah, so Mike is an incredibly giving individual. So don't feel like you can't ask him a question, because he's like super approachable, super awesome. So tell us about Hack Your Fear, and I'm going to have you slide forward because I didn't hear the last thing. I saw your lips say thank you, Michelle, but I didn't hear anything.
I'll also turn the gain up on this a little bit to make sure that it's going. Yeah, so basically at the end of the day, like, while I was going through these panic attacks, what I realized is they would put me on like 2 to 3 day funks, right? Like, they were super debilitating for me. And in those moments, I would at least cling to personal development, right? The business I was building at the time tanked because I wasn't doing what was actually driving revenue, but at least I was reading, right? Like, that's how I rationalized it. And I was super grateful for that. But during that and during other times in my life, like maybe people listening can relate, you stray away from what actually makes you you, right? And whether that is building the business, or maybe there were times where for me that was also the personal development. There were times where it was the mindfulness, right? Exploring meditation, times where it was the working out. And I started to build out these blitzes for myself before I had any idea how it worked, or like what the mechanics were in our bodies, like why that was actually driving the production that I wanted. And I started to build these things, and it worked really, really well, right? First, it was just about building consistency around social media content for a business that I was building. Or actually before that, it was just about personal development and self-care. And I realized, like, holy crap, that was amazing. Maybe it will work in business. And I did it. And it worked in business too. And I'm like, okay, this is really cool. But at the time, I was still resisting the coaching industry. I had a very negative stigma, just me personally. Saw a bunch of 17-year-old life coaches on Instagram, and I didn't understand coaching, by the way. Like, that's on me. I was comparing it to the athletic world, which was like you had to have the solution, right? I didn't realize that coaching in the adult world is having a structure and helping navigate conversation to facilitate breakthrough. Two very different things. Having the solution now is what we would really call consulting. And we do that for some clients in certain areas. But I didn't understand those. So I'm like, 17-year-old dude, like, what life experience do you have? You got no clients, no business. Like, I just didn't want to be associated with it. But eventually I met Brendon Burchard. He's the world's leading high performance coach. And for whatever reason, those words, high performance, like, it gave me the permission I was seeking. And I wrote actually coincidentally, I had been connected in a podcast with someone who also spoke at that event, Mel Robbins. Shout out to Mel Robbins. She played a massive role in my journey. And she said something on a podcast that for whatever reason, I'd heard it a million times before, but it clicked. And it made me understand why things worked. And it was very simply around this idea that decisions are emotional, they're not logical. But that happened maybe a month or two before that event. I meet Brendon, gives me the permission, and I wrote the curriculum for Fear Hacking on the flight home from that event. And the flight was like Ohio to New York. It was like an hour and a half, maybe. Really, really quick flight. But that's the context to like how all this became a thing. But what fear hacking is, it's based on that principle, right? Decisions are emotional, they're not logical. And it really boils down to, in a very simplistic world, seeking pleasure or avoiding pain. Right? That's really it. Because we have a 2,000-year-old brain, and it hasn't evolved a whole lot in that time frame. And back then it was like, cool, well, I want to avoid the saber-toothed tiger, right? Like, that's it.
Yeah.
So avoiding pain, which is essentially fear, right? You could use those two very synonymously. That's actually more powerful than seeking pleasure. So I was thinking about it. I'm like, well, when we talk about fear, what do we think about? Like, loud noises, fear of heights, fear of public speaking, the dark, right? Like
spiders.
Right now, COVID, like things that paralyze us. Yep. Spiders, is that what you said?
I hate spiders.
Exactly. But like these things, they paralyze us. And in my head, I'm like, why is one of the most powerful forces in the decision-making process, which ultimately dictates our reality, it dictates what we create for our lives. The most powerful source is doing nothing but getting us stuck in the mud. Why? Why don't we learn how to leverage it? And that's really what it is. So we've built these practices to figure out how do we manufacture fear that's going to drive the decision we know we need to make. That's what we do in these blitzes.
Okay, so that's exactly where I was going to go. So you keep talking about these blitzes, but those of us on the outside world, what is a blitz?
Yeah, so when I say blitz, all I mean is it's a short window of time where we're going to work our asses off.
Okay, and so what are we doing when we're working our asses off?
Figuring out exactly what we want, reverse engineering what it will take to get there, and doing those things. Please don't, like, for everyone listening, please don't misinterpret working our asses off as like you have to work 47 hours a day. Right. That's not the case. Like, not everyone wants to have an 8 or a 9-figure business, right? Some people maybe were completely content with making $100,000 a year and like working a 9 to 5. Amazing. Do that. Don't do anything else if you don't want to. But if you want that 7-figure income, You can't have the minimum wage work ethic. So we need to know what we want, right? The clarity piece. And then we can reverse engineer what it takes to get there. We build these blitzes around those action items, what it's actually going to take, quantifiable things. We need numbers, we need metrics. We need to be able to measure these things.
Okay, so that's
what we do.
That's where I was going next. So how do you reverse engineer, and what metrics are you looking at to make sure that, it's the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the stuff that we do is fluff and 20% actually gets us where we want to go. So how do we focus on the 20% and make sure that what we're reverse engineering is that 20% to get us where we need to go? And what are the metrics we're looking at?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my favorite way to boil these things down is from Brian Tracy's Eat the Frog. Amazing book.
I love that book.
Full
Such
of
a good book.
Every chapter is an amazing productivity tip, trick, strategy. A lot of them accomplish the same thing, frankly, and they're just different flavors. Mm-hmm. The one that has always resonated for me and has always worked really well for myself and my clients is one called the Law of Three, which essentially, you kind of alluded to very similar numbers. Essentially what it means is 90% of our results come from about 30% of our actions, right? So if you and I were to look at like, cool, well, what do I need to do? Like, what are my responsibilities in my business? The stuff that if I don't do them, they don't get done and everything explodes. Everyone will typically have 7 to 10 items on that list. So if we go to these numbers, we know that 3 of those items actually yield 90% of the results. So we then need to just filter that list. Like, what are those 3 items, right? And you do that by one question. If I can only do one thing on this list that will have the most results and have the biggest impact on my life and my business, what would it be? And you circle it and you do it again. One more thing, biggest results, most impact, what would it be? Circle it. And then one final one, biggest results, most impact, what would it be? Those are the 3 items that we need to be really building our calendars around and really prioritizing, because that's what's driving the needle. Everything else needs to be either eliminated or delegated. And we might not necessarily be at a time or a place where we can afford to eliminate or delegate, but at least we can look at things through a different lens of, I need to be spending more time in these 3 areas, right?
Yep.
Because if we simply look at these numbers, and let's assume a perfectly simplistic world where all those 10 items on that list get 10% of our calendar. Well, we've just freed up 70% of our calendar and we're still getting 90% of the results. And then it's tough to show this without a whiteboard. True story, I actually got this easel right behind me to do this exact training because I needed to be able to show it. But cool, we double that 30% of work because maybe we want a little bit more than that, right? So we start to scale it out to fit our goals. Yep. We're still at only 60%, but 180% of the results. Maybe we want a little more, add a little bit more.
Yep.
90% yielding 270% of the results. And like, screw it. I don't know. I'm an overachiever. Let's fill that last sliver. And all of a sudden we're at 300%. We've tripled our results by slimming down where we're spending our time. So those are the things that need to get there. And then it's up to us to figure out, cool, well, we need to track our numbers. Like, easy example is, okay, I need to do X makes X number of sales calls to get Y number of appointments to get Z number of closes, right? Well, then we can estimate, like, make an educated decision. If we do 30% more, let's say 100 calls leads to 30 appointments, leads to 4 closes. Well, if we do 30% more, we're going to get 30% more deals closed. We can make that estimation.
Yep.
Right. Then we just need to overload the numbers and figure out what are the strategies and structure that we need to do to hit these higher numbers without the burnout. Yep. That's the beauty of what happens in these blitzes, but we need to have the numbers. We need to be able to measure it. And then we need to kind of build up from there.
Yep. And it's so funny because, again, we kind of do the same thing. Like, I tell people all the time, write down everything you do. And now, what are the things that only you can do, right? Like this podcast interview, right? Only you can do that, Mike. Nobody else can do that. And then take everything else on the list and pretend you got hit with a Mack truck yesterday. How do you get that done? Right. And it's a really bad way to say it, but it brings the point home of, do I eliminate it or do I delegate it? And if I can't eliminate it, how do I delegate it? How do I set it up so that it's not on my plate, so it frees me up for that 30% that I really need to be focusing on, and my time shouldn't be going anywhere else. So that's huge. Knowledge bomb right there. Love it. All right. So I ask everybody this question. If you had one book that you could give to a aspiring entrepreneur that would help them on their journey, what would it be? What book would you give them?
By Bob Burg and John David Mann. It's the best book of all time.
You kind of cut out. Can you say it again?
The Go-Giver by Bob Burg and John David Mann.
That's my favorite book.
It's the best book of all time. It changed the game for me. My uncle sent me that book in my early 20s. He sent me a text one day and he's like, hey, Michael, like there's a book showing up, a box from Amazon. Keep an eye out. And it happened to be The Go-Giver and another book. And that book changed the game to me. I relentlessly recommend that book aggressively, more than any other book, more than the greats of, you know, the Think and Grow Rich and How to Win Friends and Influence People and the Rich Dad, Poor Dads, all these like stereotypical entrepreneurial self-help books, which are amazing. Yep. The Go-Giver's up here for me.
Absolutely. And, 100%.
I got to interview Bob Burg and it was like the biggest like life moment for me.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. I'm so jealous. It's on my to-do list.
Yeah, he's the man. I haven't met John David Mann. We just connected on LinkedIn, so I'll have to reach out and connect. But that book, by far, it's not even like a comparison.
And the cool part is, for those of you who haven't read The Go-Giver, it's such an easy read because it's a story. And you don't even realize that you're like learning all these diamonds until you get to the end of the book and you're like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And it's a short book. Like it's not like this huge thick book. It's amazing.
Yeah. It was that was the biggest thing for me because Michelle, I was the guy who had to I had to learn how to take the SAT because I read so slow that I needed to know which questions to guess on because it wasn't a good expenditure of my time. Right. And so like reading wasn't like my thing. You know, and having that like parable type format really, really supported me. But you're right, super consumable, extremely powerful practices and, you know, and information. And yeah, I highly recommend it.
Awesome. So I want to be really careful because I know that you are blitzing interviews right now. So we have to be done on time. So I just wanted to say thank you for all the knowledge bombs that you dropped. Guys, hit up Mike on Facebook. Check out his webpage. It's MikeCesniak.com. I'm going to spell it for you guys because Cesniak is crazy. It looks crazy. It's not as bad when you pronounce it. So it's M as in Mary, I as in iguana, K as in kite, E as in Edgar, S as in Sam, Z as in zebra, C as in cat, Z as in zebra, E as in Edward, N as in Nancy, I as in iguana.
It's ES.
Oh, did I skip an S? Oh, shoot. Okay, wait. S, Z, C, Z, E, S as in Sam, N as in Nancy, I as in iguana, A as in apple, K as in kite.com. Whew. All right. Say that 10 times fast, everybody. So, yep. So hit Mike up. He is the man when it comes to processes and helping you achieve your goals. And we will see you guys next time. Thank you for tuning in to the Automate to Dominate podcast at www.awesomeoutsourcing.com/podcast. My name is Michelle Thompson.